Hey guys, it's Hannah, and today I'm coming to you with a book review for a book I'm very excited to talk about, and that is A Darker Shade of Magic by V.E. Schwab. This is the first book in the Shades of Magic trilogy by V.E. Schwab, and it takes place in a fantasy world where there are different parallel versions of London. So there is White London, Red London, Black London, and Grey London. Grey London is essentially just like the London that we know. I think timeline-wise, this London is in the 18 or 1900s, but the other Londons are very different than Grey London. Grey London, like I said, which is like our London, doesn't have any magic. Red London does have magic, and that is where our main character is from. White London also has magic, but is led by two very corrupt leaders who just want to use magic for power. And Black London has actually been closed off through a portal because it was consumed by magic. So we follow around our main character named Kel, who is what is known as an Antari, and Antari are special types of magicians or people that have magical abilities who can use bone magic, blood magic, and also travel between these parallel Londons. Kel lives with the king, queen, and prince of Red London as part of their kind of adopted family, but he serves as somewhat of an ambassador for the Red London kingdom so he can travel to the other Londons and give information to the king of Red London. However, he also has his own little thing going on the side because he is a smuggler. So there are rules in this world where you're not supposed to bring anything from the other parallel Londons into Red London, but Kel has gotten into smuggling, so he does this every once in a while. And one day he accidentally ends up smuggling something that gets him in a lot of trouble, and from there on is where the action and the rest of the story continues. Along the way, he ends up meeting a character named Delilah Bard, who is a pirate, an orphan, and a thief. Their paths eventually cross, and the two end up getting in a lot of unexpected trouble. So that's all I can really say as for a synopsis of the story without giving too much away, but I also will say that I absolutely adored this book. Vicious was the first Victoria Schwab book that I'd ever read, and I really loved that book, so I had really high expectations for her other books. However, before I read these, I'd been seeing a lot of reviews of people, some of my friends as well, saying that they didn't really enjoy this series, it didn't live up to the hype for them, and it just kind of fell flat. So I was actually going into this kind of expecting to dislike it, but I was so pleasantly surprised because I was just blown away by how much I enjoyed this. I'm a huge lover of fantasy, and while this wasn't the most complex fantasy that I've ever read because it is more along the lines of an urban fantasy, it definitely had every aspect of fantasy that I really love. There was politics, romance, action, adventure, magic, everything that I could ask for out of fantasy, plus Victoria Schwab's own original twist to a lot of things and her beautiful writing style made for such an enjoyable story. I can definitely see why this might not be everyone's favorite book or why it didn't live up to the hype for them, because in terms of fantasy, I think this one is a little bit slower paced, but I personally love slow paced books, so that's part of the reason I also really enjoyed this. Of course, it has its action and adventure aspects to it as well, but in terms of the character development and in terms of the plot development, it has a clear end goal and you know where we're supposed to be headed, but it takes its time getting there, and I really enjoyed that because it allowed me to just sit through and experience it all as it just went along. I felt like I was just going along with all of these characters. I wasn't rushed, and it just was so enjoyable for me to read it that way. I actually read this book really quickly. I think I read it in 2 sittings because I enjoyed it so much, but the pacing of the story itself is the part that I really liked because I felt like it took its time to accomplish what it needed to do, and it did so beautifully. I think these books are perfect if you're trying to make that transition from urban fantasy to more high fantasy, because this really mixes both of the elements that each of those genres have. It's somewhat urban fantasy because we have Grey London, which is just like our London, and we have our world set in here, but then we also have parallel worlds, and in those parallel worlds we have a completely different culture, a completely different system for the way that the worlds are set up, and there's magic and all of these things, so you get that high fantasy feeling within some of the Londons, and then also the urban fantasy feel in the Grey London, and I think that's one of the things that gives this series such a unique quality to it and why I think it could appeal to both urban fantasy and high fantasy lovers. Another thing that I enjoyed about this book, as always, was Victoria Schwab's writing style. Her writing style is actually quite the opposite of what I tend to reach for when I'm looking for beautiful writing. I tend to like really flowery, lyrical writing, but Victoria Schwab's writing is extremely clear and concise, and she gets to the point of whatever she's talking about, yet she somehow has the ability to make it feel magical without being flowery, and it's just so incredible and beautiful. I don't understand how she can do it, and I definitely think her writing style contributes to this, but she is a master world builder. I usually have to fill in a lot of gaps when I read fantasy in how I imagine this world or how I imagine this city and things like that, but in this story, I didn't have to do any of that myself because she did it all for me. She didn't tell me, she showed me, which is what you're supposed to do. Like, the world truly seemed like something that exists. Like, this concept of 4 Londons was something that was actually conceivable to me, because I was reading this and I was like, yeah, absolutely, I can totally see how these 4 parallel Londons could exist and how Kell could use this blood magic to get from one London to another London. Like, all of it just made sense, which is honestly kind of rare for me to find in fantasy. A lot of them just like seem really magical and whimsical, and I like that feel, of course, too, but like this made logical sense. Like, she somehow made magic seem possible, which was my favorite thing about this book. And then of course we have to talk about the characters, because as you all know, I love character-driven stories, and I definitely think this one was far more character-driven than plot-driven. And the characters in here, I am so glad to say I completely fell in love with. Kell is such a great main character. He's somewhat of the trope or stereotype of like that brooding main character, but he's also not, because he has so much more dimension to him than just that one quality. He is, like I said, one of the last Antari, and he is kind of being used by the king and queen of Red London, but he also has this loyalty to them that he can't let go of, and he has this desire to be free, but he also cares so much about this adopted family that he has that he could never leave them and never betray them. So he has a lot of this internal conflict going on, which makes for such great character development, and that's what he starts to get in this book. And then there's Prince Rai, his brother in this story, and I love Rai. We don't get too much of him in this book, but from what we do get, he's just so funny. And you can also tell that he has a lot going on to him too, that definitely I think gets explored in the next book, and hopefully even more in the 3rd book. And then of course we have Lila Bard, who is my queen, and I love her so much. The thing I like about her as well is that she and Kell really complement each other as characters, because like I said, Kell struggles with the loyalty that he has for his family, and then Lila has no loyalty to anyone except for herself. So there's kind of this clash between the two of their characters, but it makes for such an interesting relationship and dynamic between the two of them, and I just love it so much. I've also noticed with V.E. Schwab's books, there's just this quality to them that somehow makes me feel really nostalgic when I read them, and I don't really know how to explain it well. Every time I read one of her books, I somehow feel like I already know these characters, and not in the sense that they're unoriginal or I've read about characters like this before, but in the sense that like I feel like I've already gotten to know them. Like, she starts off telling me about them, but I feel like they're already people that I've met because they're so realistic and so well developed that like I somehow already have a relationship with these characters and already have an attachment to them. And they just feel so real, and it's incredible to me how she's able to do that. But that just about covers all of my thoughts on A Darker Shade of Magic by V.E. Schwab. If you couldn't tell from the rest of this video, I absolutely loved this book so much. It definitely lived up to the hype for me, so I'm not gonna try and hype it up too much for you guys because I know what hype can do, but I really, really enjoyed it. And if you like any of the things that I mentioned in this video in terms of writing style, in terms of plot or characters, then I would definitely suggest picking this one up and giving it a try. If you liked Vicious, I think that you would also like this, at least in terms of the writing style and in terms of the characters. I ended up giving this one a 4.5 out of 5 stars, and it has already made it on my list of favorite series of all time. I really, really enjoyed this book. But that is it for my review for A Darker Shade of Magic by V.E. Schwab. If you've read the book and would like to discuss it with me, definitely do so in the comments down below, but try and keep it spoiler free since the rest of this video is spoiler free. If you'd like to see all of my thoughts on the 2nd book, I have a video review for that up as well with spoilers, so I will leave that linked on the screen as well as down below. If you'd like to follow me on any of my social media, all of my links are in the description box as always. But thank you guys so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!